Some people, if you observe them for long enough and you see what it is that they're doing, you realize actually they're only doing this is because it's an addiction. They're only doing this because it keeps them busy and it keeps them away from the remembrance of Allah. Those are the people that I'm talking about. And unfortunately, this has become very common in our societies today. Have you ever noticed people always say, I just haven't got the time, I just haven't had the time to do something, especially when it comes to in relation to the deen. And I'm not just talking about prayers, but I'm talking about things like when it comes to seeking knowledge, when it comes to purifying ourselves, when it comes to seeking wisdom. That conversation in a lot of general social circles doesn't even come up because people are so busy doing something else. And I've noticed that it's not just work that people seem to be busy with. I've noticed there are a lot of people that are out there where if work isn't taking up all of your time, they are finding ways to keep themselves busy so it keeps them distracted from Allah. If it's not the extension on the house, if it's not their children's education, if it's not, these kind of things, there's always something, there's always some project in addition to work that just seems to be taking up all of our energy, taking up all of our time. And it's normally stuff that in isolation seems perfectly harmless. It seems harmless, it seems innocent, it seems reasonable, it seems like, oh, this is something that needs to be done, like helping the child with higher education. All these things seem very, very important. But some people, if you observe them for long enough and you see what it is that they're doing, you realize actually they're only doing this is because it's an addiction. They're only doing this because it keeps them busy and it keeps them away from the remembrance of Allah. Those are the people that I'm talking about. And unfortunately, this has become very common in our societies today. People are so much focused on just achieving perfection in this world. I want my son to have the best grades. I want to have the best looking house. I want to have the best car. I want to have all these things. That they forget that only the hereafter is perfect. And actually, when you emotionally invest your energy into something like this, it's taking you away from Allah. One of the reasons that I don't watch football, and the thing, it always tends to come up with a lot of other guys. They're always surprised to come across a guy, especially in England, who doesn't watch football. The reason why I don't watch it is because I don't want to invest in it emotionally. I don't want it to take me away from Allah. Like, I don't want it to rule my emotions. If you're starting to think about something like that while you're working, while you're praying, while you're doing other things that you're supposed to be focusing on in coming closer to Allah, and it's occupying your mind, getting upset over some guy who wasn't able to get his ball into a goal. Like, in the grand scheme of things, it's just not important at all. Or getting upset about how one footballer got transferred to another team. It's just, these things are just not important in the grand scheme of things. I don't think how many more miles per gallon my car was to get would matter on the day of judgment. And I'm thinking about these things. I know, like, how I speak to somebody else, or how I focus on what's inside my heart. If I have hypocrisy inside my heart, if I have arrogance inside my heart, if I have pride, vanity, any of these things, that if I've spent the time to focus on those, I know that will matter on the day of judgment. And they say an atom's worth of reflection is worth 1,000 hours worth of ibadah. These kind of things actually matter a lot more. But we seem to busy ourselves with distractions. Ultimately, what these things are just distractions. Football's a distraction. The house is a distraction. A lot of these things are just distractions. And people seem to be getting caught up in all of these. And I think before we had, these economic crises where the cost of living was so high, people weren't able to do that with work. The first thing that people now do that with is work. Because work is no longer 9 to 5, it's 7 till 7. And people are working extra hours to bring in more money. They're doing all these other things. But a lot of these things can actually be a very convenient distraction because it takes you away from Allah. There's no time left for the prayer. There's no time left for the self-reflection. There's no time left to seek wisdom, let alone knowledge. This video has been recorded in Ramadan. I don't know if it'll come out during Ramadan, but Ramadan is supposed to be a time of reflection, but a lot of us, we only slow down in Ramadan, and the rest of the time we're just back trying to satisfy our nafs and just back full time, full speed. And I think a lot of these events that take place around us, like some of the geopolitical events that are taking place, are actually good reminders to us about what actually matters and what doesn't actually matter, so that we can spend the time and focus on ourselves and say, okay, what do I want to be doing? Where do I want to be on the day of judgment? Do I want to meet Allah with a really good remodeled kitchen, or do I want to meet him with a really good state of my heart? But if we keep busying ourselves with things that are distractions and not accepting it to ourselves, then we're going to get ourselves into a lot of problems. We're going to get ourselves into a lot of trouble. The problem is that for the kuffar, those vices are seen as genuine vices, right? The alcohol, the drugs, the promiscuity, these kind of things. So we can say, okay, well, these things are vices. But what happens is we don't do that with other things that are perfectly halal and perfectly innocent, like the kitchen remodel or like the education, because you can justify that and say, well, I need to live in a decent house. My son needs to have a good education. We don't have the honest conversation with ourselves and tell ourselves, wait a minute, are we doing this because it really needs to be done? Or are we doing this because it's an easy distraction? Like, it's perfectly permissible to be watching football, and you're going to be hard pressed to find any fiqh that says, it's haram to watch football or to get involved in football. But are you able to have an honest conversation with yourself and ask yourself, am I just doing this because it's permissible and I'm just having a rest and I deserve some leisure? Or am I doing this because it's an easy distraction? That's the conversation that we need to be having with ourselves. Like, when you focus on having that conversation with yourself and you avoid the distractions and you avoid the addictions and you look inward and you focus on getting rid of the blemishes, it strengthens the heart. And the stronger the heart becomes, the clearer your perception becomes, and you start recognizing things. You start recognizing ills in society, you start recognizing evils in society, you start recognizing what your place is in addressing the ills of society. But if you spend that time where you're just distracted, your heart just doesn't have the strength to deal with the stuff that actually matters. Like, we have a purpose on earth. As Muslims, Allah told us that we are vicegerents on earth. We're supposed to be busy with implementing His justice, and we're supposed to be busy with upholding His justice, and we're supposed to be busy with His worship. That's the thing that's supposed to occupy us, and we're supposed to have this purpose. But if we're not doing those things, then everything else is unfortunately just a distraction. And distractions very much weaken the heart. They put wahan in the heart. It makes us more attached to this world, and it makes us incapable of worshipping Him. It makes us incapable of upholding His justice. The only reason we're living in a society in which there is now so much injustice, in which there are so many ills, is because the hearts of the people are weak. And that's not me pointing fingers at people or being all self-righteous about it. It's the reality of the situation. We all have very weak hearts because we're not capable of recognizing an ill, first of all. There are many ills now in society that when they were first introduced into society, we couldn't even recognize them as an ill. They seemed perfectly harmless to us. There would have been very few naysayers at the time when those things were introduced into society that people could say, this is an ill. But years and years later, we now recognize, some of us are now able to recognize that actually this thing is harmful to us, or this was a distraction. And that could be anything. It could be something in the food supply. It could be the fact, mobile phones. It could be anything. But we failed to see those things at that time. But people who have strong hearts can see those as soon as they happen, and they can do something about preventing that even getting into society in the first place. When the heart is distracted, it just gets a lot of noise. It actually becomes really turbid. It can't see things clearly. You can signal an injustice to somebody, and they won't even be able to recognize it for an injustice in itself. We're living in a world where narcissism is on the increase, toxic environments on the increase, large-scale oppression and tyranny is on the increase globally in geopolitical ways. And a lot of the times we can't even see it for what it is. We can't see the truth for what it is. And what I'm saying is, the reason why all of that is happening is because of these very simple, innocent distractions, the things that we're distracting ourselves with, which seem very innocent on the surface. They seem very basic on the surface. They seem harmless. But actually, we have to consider the state of our heart and what it's doing to it.